Hey everybody, it's Professor Snart with a quick video check-in here as we continue along with our English 1152 poetry class. So just a quick look at our due dates here. It's Wednesday the 6th of March, even though it doesn't feel like it outside, as I'm recording this. So we're just finishing up our sonnet writing unit here, and then we have a reply turnaround, and then I'll take us into Unit 5. Before I do that though, just a really quick reminder that down here in Unit 10 you'll be reporting out on a poetry event that you've attended, so be sure that that's on your radar as something to do. Like I've said in previous announcements, you don't want to wait until Unit 10 to try to find something at the last minute and you're scrambling and going to something that's not really a poetry event, or you're having to go to one that's really inconvenient as far as location or time or whatever. So really be thinking about attending that now, even though it's not until Unit 10 where you're necessarily reporting out on it. So keep that in mind. You might also want to look a little ways ahead to our group project, even if just to figure out sort of who your group is. But again, that's a few units away. We'll stay a little bit closer to home here in Unit 4, where as part of our study of the sonnet, I think it's useful to actually write them just to experience or to understand how the rules of the sonnet actually work. In practice, it's one thing to study them sort of like in theory, but in practice, how do they work? So you're writing your own, keeping in mind that what I'm looking for is, not how profound your sonnet is necessarily, but really, does it show evidence that you understand what the rules of sonnet form are, even if a lot of the authors that we read kind of deviate in places from those. But does your sonnet show evidence that you understand the rules? In other words, think of your sonnet as almost like a quiz or a test, just like hopefully more fun to do, on whether you understand the rules. As far as 14 lines, that's easy enough. Do you have the rhyme scheme correct? And then I think the trickiest part is the metrical device, the iambic pentameter. Building out your portfolio, so we're keeping that up to date, and then visiting and responding to at least 4 of your classmates' posts here. Again, we're not doing like a writer's workshop critiquing these necessarily. You can comment on adherence to or evidence of the rules in the sonnets, but again, just sort of trying to celebrate the creative energy that people are putting into these. Sonnet rules, again, at least for the Elizabethan or Shakespearean sonnet that you can return to, and honestly, Googling a lot of it will pull up like lots of good information as well. So there's not just our class as a source for info. So let's jump into unit number 5 then. A bunch of new poems to read, although they're all fairly short. I don't think there's anyone that's longer than about a page. Some of them even substantially shorter than that, like We Real Cool by Gwendolyn Brooks. You'll see that there's a real range of poems here from, again, length and tone and sort of like the mood or the atmosphere. There's some that are very, what I would call full, like Do Not Go Gentle, for example. But then there's other really spare ones like We Real Cool. This is just to say one of my favorite poems, actually. It's like funny, but I think thought-provoking at the same time. So hopefully a good mix. And again, a bit of a mix of some older stuff. The Victorian poet Matthew Arnold, Dover Beach, is really interesting, but some more contemporary stuff as well that you'll see. So kind of a mix. So what we're going to do then is actually a fairly traditional kind of assignment. Think of it as a comparative essay or comparative analysis, where you're just picking 2, right, of the poems from our readings for this unit and comparing them. So we don't want to compare them in terms of things that are different, right? We really do want to focus on those similarities. We want to really keep our comparative analysis grounded in the text, so making sure that we're careful to quote and pointing to actual, lines or even words that are echoing one another across the 2 poems. Comparing maybe in terms of theme, obviously, but again, really trying to ground that in specific evidence from the text. And you might also attend to something that poetry gives us in a way that maybe like fiction doesn't, is the way that the poet or the artist has used the space of the page. So how does the poem look? Again, short lines, long lines, really spare and kind of angular. Are the lines more fully fleshed out? How do the line breaks work? Is it choppy or does it flow really nicely? So again, you can compare all of that stuff across the poems as well. It doesn't just have to be a big kind of thematic comparison. So like in a really traditional essay, I'm looking for at least 3 kind of main points of comparison, although again, we really want to stay pretty grounded in specifics of the work. We don't want to say like, oh, they're both about love. Like that's a huge generic abstract idea that would link a million poems out there. So try to be as specific and concrete as possible. You want to arrange your discussion so it's not just talking about everything about one work and then everything about the next work. That feels like 2 sort of mini essays jammed together rather than going back and forth in that more comparative way. And so like I say here, the only wrinkle to the thing that we're doing is that instead of you writing this all out in this really sort of static and kind of conventional way, I'm inviting everybody to do a video essay. It doesn't mean that you have to be a talking head on the screen, although you could do it that way if you want. But think of a really creative way where you can record your voice, like I'm doing right now, but show us something on the screen that would really help make your comparison. Okay, so there's lots of different ways to do that. I provided a couple screenshots for, uploading your stuff to YouTube and then getting it into your portfolio. Truthfully, they change the interface, especially on YouTube, so often that some of the screenshots might not even look like this anymore. It feels like every time I log in, the icons are somewhat differently placed or whatever. But it's pretty straightforward to do, honestly. I can certainly help with any of the tech stuff or if you run into problems. But again, we have our Google account, so we have access to YouTube. And once it's in that Google space, whether it's in your Drive space, your video that you do, whether it's in your Drive space, in YouTube, it's a fairly seamless to plunk that into your portfolio and update that. Then you're posting that to the discussion board here, and we have the usual kind of look at what everyone's done and do some replies. There's a little bit about why here, so there is kind of some pedagogy or there's some reasoning behind it as far as effective learning, but honestly, it's also just fun to see each other. Okay, so one little practical tip here. What I don't want you to do is feel like you have to write the whole essay out and just like speak it into the computer like it's a script that you're following. On the other hand, I wouldn't trust your memory just to kind of like wing your way through the whole thing. So again, use the what's on screen maybe to help us see the comparison, but maybe to help you get through the points that you want to make. And at the very least, make yourself a little outline. We might never see it, or I might never see it, so it can just be pencil and paper, however you want to do it. It doesn't need to be neat. But kind of have an idea of like, how do you want to introduce this theme? Make sure you get the author names and the poem titles correct, and make sure you say those so we know what we're talking about. Make sure you have a sense of what kind of the main points that you want to cover are, and then again, make sure that you have access to or a note for yourself about what particular quotes or pieces from each text you want to pull out to sort of prove your point or to provide evidence that those comparisons you're making are valid, so you want to quote from the text. So again, you don't need to write all of this out like you would a traditional essay and then just speak it into the camera or into the microphone. But you do want to make some notes for yourself so you're not just totally making it up as you go along. And what you might find, even though it feels like kind of a strange way to do a fairly traditional kind of thing, once you do your own, you may actually feel how different it is to speak this stuff and show somebody, almost like you're teaching us, rather than just writing an essay. And as you watch other people's, I think you'll really get the sense of how cool it is to be, if not in direct conversation, then at least have like the people in your class be real humans that are actually like trying to teach you something in real time there. It's actually pretty cool. Okay, so again, fairly conventional assignment, I think. Lots of cool poems to read this time around, none of them super long, so don't be intimidated here. And again, if you want or need any of tech help, or maybe have an idea that you're not quite sure how to execute, by all means be in touch with me, but try to reach out to me sooner rather than later, again, just so we're not scrambling at the last minute. And again, one last reminder before I sign off here, keep in mind that it's a few units away, but we do have that poetry event coming up, and we have our list of poetry events here that you can both contribute to if you know of something, but also check out. So there's a couple that, this one is listed here. I didn't put this one in, so thanks to whoever put that one in. Although I know many students who, for this assignment, have done this activity, and they all report being really kind of blown away. Like, they didn't really think of themselves as people who went to poetry slams, but they had a good time. It was a really cool atmosphere. People are really generous and cool about it. And this one is a really great one. If you're otherwise on campus anyway, it's part of our Writers Read event. Kevin Koval is coming to read. April 9th at 11 a.m. He's a really interesting poet, kind of an activist poet, so he's pretty edgy. Local to Chicago. He's also the founder of the spoken word festival called Louder Than a Bomb, which is a pretty big deal in the world of spoken word kind of activist poetry. So a really interesting guy. You can check him out as a website here too. So keep in mind, poetry event coming up. I will continue to try to populate the list with things that I bump into. If you know of something maybe in your neck of the woods, feel free to add it. You can just visit the document here and type right into it. But keep this assignment on your radar so you're not scrambling at the last minute trying to attend something. Okay? All right, so hopefully everyone's doing good, and if you have any questions, concerns, or just need to be in touch with me, feel free to send me an email.